So the test is tomorrow. I just want you to be 100% sure what's out there, kind of from last week and this week. And I told you I'd take stuff late this chapter just because it's been so disjointed with Christmas and I is gone and I've had people who have been sick. And so, but just make sure when it's digital, the only one that talks to me is the Google Forms. So if you turn in a Google form late, it'll send me an email. But Delta Math, Ed Puzzle, that stuff you have to, just shoot me an email and then I enter it pretty quickly. Sometimes I forget, like I forgot with one of yours that you sent me an email. Just shoot me another one and I get that in pretty fast. But from last week for test prep, so if I go back to last Wednesday, we had a quiz in Delta Math that was required and then I did corrections up to 100%. So that was kind of our first big, like that was intense. And then we've had some smaller ones. So we did an optional if you needed some more notes, but you didn't have to do that. We really started our review on Thursday, and it was in 3 parts. So Thursdays was a required video review, and I did collect that. Most of you turned that in, but if you haven't, you should do that first. That's the number one. I think all but 2 of you I got that from, but that's out there and it's really important. So that was required. It was Ed Puzzled too, but actually I did the points off the paper copy. So hand me the paper copy. All right. And then after that, that was just sit and watch the notes. You had enough time to do most of that in class. Then on Friday, we did the paper component of the reviews. The review's in 3 parts. The keys to that are on here. If you can't access them on your computer today because the Wi-Fi has been down, the school Wi-Fi, you should be able to on your phone. Definitely correct the reviews though. Okay, that I'll collect tomorrow though, because your test is tomorrow. So even if that's done, because we had all hour on Friday to work on it, don't turn it in yet. Also then, there was the third part of the review, which was optional. Some of you have this chapter down, I can tell. Like your Delta Math was 20 or 21 out of 21. Everything's been, then I wouldn't do it. But if you do, you need to do one of them to be eligible for test corrections, and you can do another for 3 test points extra credit. People have started to turn those in. All right. If you don't know where to turn it in, there's a slot on this choices board on each one of these. It says Google form to turn in. There's also one on today's slide. So that was last week. Right? We did the Delta Math. We really are reviewing for this chapter. It should go really well unless you haven't done them. And I felt like by Friday, like you guys were getting really good at it. So that's good. But I actually could have tested today, but I was gone and Christmas, all that stuff. So whatever. So today, what we're going to do is just our very last work on your review stuff. Maybe you still need to do finish the paper practice from Friday. Here's another turn-in form though for that extra review. All right, so any questions about, I'm not giving you any new stuff today, but any questions about what's out there? No? When you finish something that's digital, what should you do to? Email me just so I know it doesn't talk to me. Sometimes I'll go in and look. I'll do student last action and I'll be like, oh, Josie finished something. But usually I don't take the time to do that. So all we're going to do today, I told you for review days, I talk for like 10 minutes. That's very test specific. Friday we did calculator active. Remember doing that? Just for like 10 minutes, I said, make sure you know how to do this on a calculator. Today's is analytic, just being 100% sure what to do based on what you're given. And then it's work time the rest of the hour. Make sure you use it. So today, you can choose to write or not write. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not collecting it. And I want to record for people who are gone. I have some random questions up here. I'm not going to actually answer the questions and take the derivatives because we're at a point where that should be fine. It's just going to be knowing like what to do based on what you're given. So I've got one rational function up here, x squared divided by x squared plus 1. That may be the actual function. It may be the derivative that you're given. That's kind of 50-50. Sometimes you're given the actual function itself, right? And sometimes you're given the derivative of the function. Rarely with the analytical ones are you given the second derivative because there's not much you can do with that. Sometimes, like they'll give it to you and ask you for inflection points. You're like, oh, it's already there. I just find the zeros and it's nice and easy. But these are the main ones. So I just want to talk about these prompts. So if it gave you F and asked you, I'll do F in blue and F prime in black. If you were given F and it asked you for critical values of F, what would you do? You'd actually have to take the derivative and find where that derivative equaled what? Or find where that derivative does not exist, correct? For the zero part, what part of the quotient would you look at? The top. What makes the top zero? For the D and E, what part would you look at? What makes the denominator zero? If there's nothing, then there's no places, correct? But that one you would actually have to take the derivative using what rule? Quotient. Well, you could do product, but I wouldn't. Then you have to write it as x squared plus 1 to the negative 1 to the negative 1. I'm going to veto that. Quotient rule, right? If that, though, was f prime itself, you don't need to do anything. You can tell me the critical values right now. Right? What's the critical value? 0 and 0 only. Correct? So if it gave you f prime, then your critical value is just at x equals 0. You know it already. Correct? If I asked you, where was f concave up? Correct? If you were given f, what would you have to do? Take the derivative, and then what? Take the derivative again, and then what? Find where that's equal to what? 0. Maybe there's 2 places. I'm just going to go like this. And then do what? Sign analysis. And where would you choose? Yeah, you should really be listening, Mr. Boone. Definitely. All right. He's been gone, that's why I said. Not because he's Mr. Boone, but he's been absent. So you should definitely have your computer laid down. You should definitely be listening. All right. So next step. So that's if you were given F. If you were given F prime, what would you need to do? Take just one more derivative and the same thing, correct? So that would be fairly straightforward. Some of these questions, though, actually do have a little more thought to it. If you were given F and it asked you for the relative extrema, what would you need to do? Take the derivative. You'd actually have to take the derivative because it's not there, correct? And then what would you find? Your critical values in your D and E's, correct? And maybe there was a D and E here because the denominator equaled 0 and a 0 here, and maybe it went plus, minus, plus, correct? And you just analyze off of that. But if it gave you the derivative, which sometimes you have it, and you're like, oh, they gave me the derivative. What's the only thing that would go on your sign line? 0. Exactly. You already know what the critical value is. Agreed? And I would just watch. You don't really need to write this down. It's actually kind of, the way I'm writing it, a little confusing. But you would just do a sign line to the left and to the right. That's it. Agreed? Now, what if I asked you for the absolute minimum of f? Not relative, but absolute lowest it ever got. If I gave you f, what would you do? You would. Even before that, though, once you start a table, what would you put on your table? 0 and 10. And then you would do what? Take a derivative, correct? And find where that derivative equals 0 or doesn't exist, but it's usually just 0. Maybe you found one more critical value. Where would you plug those x's? Into the original function, correct? And the lowest output would be your absolute min. Your absolute min is the y value, correct? Agreed? Not the x value, the y value. But if I gave you f prime, correct? That would be actually not a question I could ask you without a graph. Do you know why? Because you don't know how to go backwards, correct? So you wouldn't be able to figure out f of 0 or f. So I wouldn't be able to ask you that one. Next, how about does Rolle's theorem apply? What is that a question about? Suppose I gave you f right here, and I asked you, does Rolle's theorem apply on this? What do you have to check for? You have to check for what? For Rolle's theorem. Actually, three things. Start and end at the same point. Rolle's has an extra one. So you would say, well, f of 0, but before even that, it's the function's got to be what? Continuous. Is my function continuous on 0 to 10? Yes. Differentiable. I would have to take the derivative and see. Let's suppose it's yes, because I actually think that one was a yes. It would be, because I wouldn't have anywhere where the denominator would equal 0, because I draw a line and square below, right? Yep. So the below is always positive. So it's continuous and it's differentiable. MVT applies right now, correct? But for Rolle's, what has to happen? Start and end at the same height. F of 0 is 0. F of 10 is 100 over 101, right? So the Rolle's would not apply. But if I change that to MVT, would it apply? Yes. Okay. Next step. What if I asked you for the inflection points of F? All right, and I gave you F itself. What would you do? Take the derivative. Then what would you do? Take the derivative again. And then what would you make? I just want you to have the process. I'm not actually taking the derivatives. So inflection points, if I was given F, I'd have to take a derivative again. I'd make a sign line for what? F double prime. And what would I look for on my sign line? A change of what? Sign at some place where it equals 0. So possible inflection, definite inflection. Does that make sense? If I was given the first derivative and asked the same question, that'd be less work, correct? Because I just have to do what? One more derivative. So be careful what level you're on, whether you get to use the function itself, have to take a derivative, or even have to take another derivative. This question is the hardest one up there. All right? So everybody look at that. What if, let's suppose you were given the f prime one. Let's just go back up to here. Suppose this was f prime, and it asked you what the maximum slope is. The maximum of a function occurs where? The maximum value of any function, regardless of what it is. What do you consider? Yep.
Critical values
of the function, correct? And the endpoints, if there are any. So once I consider those endpoints, so I would make a table, and on my table would be 0 and 10. But now you'd have to decide what goes over here. It says the maximum slope. I need the maximum of the slope. So what do I need the maximum of? Well, yeah, so I actually need the maximum of f prime, which would mean I would need to consider anywhere where f prime equals what? 0 and changes sign. The maximum of f, I look at endpoints and f prime, correct? The maximum of f prime, I look at endpoints and what? F double prime. It's kind of like position, velocity, acceleration. If I look for the maximum velocity, wouldn't I need the acceleration to change signs? Like from accelerating to what? De-accelerating, I guess. What's that called? Decelerating. Yeah, it didn't feel right coming out of my mouth. De-accelerating. But so when you're looking for the maximum of any function, you look at its derivatives, critical values, correct? So the maximum of the slope, you would look at where f double prime equals 0. How about the minimum slope? You look at where what? F double prime equals 0. But those would be your critical values on your table. Does this make sense? So you got to be very careful what level you're on. All right? Last one. What if I asked you for the value of c guaranteed by the MVT? Is the function continuous? Yes. Is it differentiable? Yes. So what would you do? I'm not going to find it. What would you do? What'd you say? Yep, so the instantaneous rate of change, that's kind of the theory behind it. equals the average rate of change. So here's your function. Your average rate of change is over the interval. There's at least one place where they're equal, correct? To get the AROC, what do you do to get this average rate of change? Use the interval and plug in the numbers. Be more specific, go ahead.
Take the slope of the secant line.
Yeah, which in this case would be f of what? It was on the interval from 0 to 10. F of 10 would be y2 minus what? F of 0 would be y1 over 10 minus 0. It's just the slope of a line from algebra 2. Whatever that would be, it's some number. I don't want to calculate it. I set it equal to the slope of the tangent line, correct? What is that? The derivative. Exactly, which if they gave me the derivative, great, but they wouldn't, because then I couldn't calculate these. So you would actually have to take the derivative. Does that make sense? Are we good? That's about it for today, because Friday's was calculator active details. The day before that was graph analysis details, correct? So the rest of the hour you have a ton of time. I'm going to pause this. But remember what you're working on. So there were 3 levels to this review. Number 1 was required notes, and you need to turn them in. I have almost all of them, but if you haven't taken those yet, those were on Thursday's slide. Number 2, what was it? I'm just 100% sure you know what you need to do. The paper from Friday, the paper review. What's the most important about the paper review? The most important thing? Check it. Yeah, the videos are linked. So if you don't check it, it's not even worth doing it because you won't know if they're right or wrong. Alright? So make sure you check it. Number 3 was optional. You do not have to do it. But some people have been absent in this class. Like I have 3 of you who have multiple, like you weren't here when I discussed this. You weren't here when I discussed this. You did come back for the review, right? But there have been multiple absences. I just want to make sure. The 3rd one was optional. Why would you opt to do it? You have to do one of them to be eligible for test corrections. If you don't think you're going to need them, I wouldn't do it, right? What's the other reason you might want to do it? We're at the end of a semester, so I am offering, like, I don't know if I've told you this before, but if Josie were to come up to me and say, Lou, I've got an 89.4, what can I do for an A minus? I'd say at this point, nothing, right? Because I always kind of have little things embedded along the way. How many points extra credit do you get?
3.
3 test points, right, for doing an extra one. Some of you have already turned that in. So I know some of you are done with this whole thing, which means what should you do between now and tomorrow? Maybe if you didn't check your paperwork, check it. I don't know. I've started to get this turned in already, which means some of you are done. Yeah.
Because there were 3 different options for extra credit, right?
Yes.
If we did all 9, could we get 9?
No.
Okay.
No. The most extra credit you can get is 3. And that's for doing, you have to do one of them for test corrections, a second of them. If you do all 3 to prep for the test, that'd be great, but that's a lot of work. Yeah. And I don't know if I told this class, but in the test correction, in this optional review, one of them is AP Classroom, and it just says to watch 3 of the sections, right? Which 3 should you watch? The 3 you need help on the most, not the shortest just to get it done, or that test corrections, you're going to end up with a C and you'll correct to a B minus and it's not that great. So if you struggle with the MVT and rolls, watch that one. If you're like, I don't get the second derivative test, watch that one. Like, read through the titles and you'll be like, oh, that one, I should watch that one. Okay? What were the other 2? One was paper and graph analysis. Did anyone do that one yet? I think most were choosing the 5-able and the EP Classroom on the people who turned it in already. But that graph analysis one, if you're weak on it, I'd watch it, because what did I guarantee you're having an FRQ on? Graph analysis. Yes, definitely. And on the AP test, there's graph analysis one every year. All right. Go ahead, work. You do you, boo. If you're all done, I have no problem with you keep working on other classwork. You've been here every day using all the time. I think some of you are. Oh, you're on the paperwork there. Gotcha. Whoops.
There you go.
Okay, gotcha.
Did it stop? I don't.